Hello everyone, this is Mrs. Mountjoy again. I'm going to teach you guys about the midpoint formula. Yesterday you guys learned about the distance formula. Today's midpoint formula is actually a little bit easier than the distance formula from yesterday. The midpoint formula just means that you're finding the middle of 2 points. So actually it's going to be the average of 2 different points. Okay, the midpoint formula is represented by adding the two x values together and dividing by 2, and adding the two y values together and dividing by 2. Just like how if you wanted to find the average of two numbers, you'd add them together and divide by 2. So let's look at our first example. Find the midpoint of AB. So our 2 points are -2, 4, and 5, -4. Okay, well, -2 is our x1, 4 is our y1, 5 is our x2, and -4 is our y2. Okay, our formula states that we have to take our x2 and our x1 and add them together, and then divide by 2, and take our y2 plus our y1, add them together, and divide by 2. Okay, well, our second x is 5, plus our first x is -2. Divide by 2. Well, -5 minus 2 is 3. Divided by 2 is just 3/2, or 1.5. And then we want to do our y values. We do y2, which is -4, plus our y1, which is +4, and divide by 2. Well, -4 plus +4 is 0, and 0 divided by 2 is just 0. So the midpoint of these 2 points would be at 1.5, 0. Or you could say it is at 3/2, 0. Either one of those would work. Okay, let's try example number 2. All right, 4, 7, and -1's -6. Okay, well, in this case, 4 is going to be our x1, 7 is going to be our y1, -1 is going to be our x2, and -6 is going to be our y2. So let's go ahead and do x2 plus x1 divided by 2. This will give us our x value for the midpoint, which is going to be somewhere in here. Okay, x2 is -1, plus x1 is 4, divided by 2. Well, -1 plus 4 is 3, divided by 2 is 3/2, or 1.5. So basically you have the same x value for this question that we did on question number 1. So let's try the y values. 7 and -6. So y2 plus y1 divided by 2. Our y2 is -6, plus our y1 is 7 divided by 2. Well, -6 plus 7 is 1. Divided by 2 is just 1/2, or 0.5. So the midpoint of example 2 would be 1.5 for our x value and 0.5 or 0.5 for our y value. So it would be 1.5 up 1/2. So it would be right in here is our midpoint. Okay, let's try example 3. Our 2 points are, oh, this one's a little bit different because look, it gives you the midpoint. It gives you M. M is the midpoint of xy, and our midpoint, M, is at -4, 7. And one of our points, our endpoint, x, is at 3, -2. So we need to find where our other endpoint is, which we don't know. It's going to be xy. So what we're going to do, we're still going to follow the same formula, which is x2 plus x1 divided by 2 will give us our midpoint x, which will give us actually -4 because that's our midpoint x. Okay, well, let's go ahead and assign 3 is going to be our x1 and -2 is going to be our y1. Since our midpoint is our answer, that is not going to be our x2 and our y2. Our endpoints are x2 and our y2, and we don't know one of our endpoints right now. Okay, so right now we have x2, which we don't know, plus x1 is our 3, divided by 2 is going to equal our midpoint x, which is -4. So we're actually working backwards here to solve for x. So in order to figure out what our endpoint x is, we're going to have to get rid of the divide by 2 by multiplying both sides by 2. So that cancels out the 2's here. So we just have x plus 3 equals -4 times 2 is -8. And then in order to get the x by itself, we would subtract 3 from both sides. So x is equal to -8 minus 3 is -11. So our endpoint x value over here would need to be -11. Now we need to find our endpoint y value. Okay? So we need to set up our equation. Y2 plus y1 divided by 2 is going to equal our midpoint y. Well, we already know what our midpoint y is. It gave it to us. It's 7. Okay, so let's plug in everything else that we know. We don't know our y2. It's our endpoint over here with y we don't know. We do know our y1 is -2. So y2 we don't know. So we're going to just call it y. Plus y1 is -2 divided by 2 is going to equal 7. So in order to get y by itself to solve for y, we would multiply both sides by 2. So we are left with y plus -2 is equal to 14, because 7 times 2 is 14. In order to get rid of this plus 2, or this, I'm sorry, this minus 2 here, we would add 2 to both sides. So y is equal to 16. So our endpoint that we're looking for, in order to make -4, 7 our midpoint, the endpoint for y would be a -11, 16. So sometimes you're going to have to work backwards to find an endpoint. Okay? Let's try example 4. M is the midpoint of xy. And M, so it's giving us the midpoint this time, is at -5, 2. So this is our midpoint. And our y value, so one of our endpoints is at -3, 4. So we need to find out where is our other endpoint. Okay, well, let's go ahead and actually use our formula, since that's what this lesson is about, is using the midpoint formula. Oops. So we need to do x2 plus x1 divided by 2 and y2 plus y1 divided by 2. Okay, here's the deal though. We have the midpoint already. We're looking for the endpoint. It's somewhere out here. Okay, so this is going to equal our midpoints. Our midpoint x and our midpoint y, which we already have, which is -5 and -2. We already know that's our midpoint. So we need to set it up like the previous problem. Our first endpoint, our x, we don't know where it is. Our second endpoint is -3, 4. So let's go ahead and label this as x1, y1, x2, y2. All right, let's plug it in. x2 is -3 plus x1, we don't know. We'll just call it x. Divided by 2 equals our x value for our midpoint, which we know is -5. So we need to work backwards to solve for x. First thing we're going to do is multiply both sides by 2. So -3 plus x equals -5 times 2 is -10. get x by itself, we're going to add 3 to both sides. So x is equal to negative 10 plus 3 is negative 7. Okay, so our x value for our endpoint that we just found is negative 7. Okay, now we need to do the same thing, but with our y values. y2 is 4 plus y1, we don't know, divide by 2 is equal to our midpoint y, which is 2. Okay, so we need to work backwards to find what y is. First step, multiply both sides by 2. 4 plus y is equal to 2 times 2 is 4. Then subtract 4 from both sides to get y by itself. Y is equal to 4 minus 4 is 0. So our y value for our other endpoint is at negative 7, 0. So let's go ahead and plot that on our graph to see if that helps with our segment here. Negative 7, 0. Remember, M is the midpoint. This is our x that we were missing, point x and point y. Well, if you were to just do slope, rise over run, you would rise 2 and run 2 to M. You would also rise 2 and run 2 to y. So this is exactly in the middle, our midpoint is, of x, which we found out was at negative 7, 0, and our y, which is at negative 3, 4. Okay, if you turn this over onto the back, the questions that are on the back of your notes is your assignment for today. Go ahead and complete this assignment in class today by using the midpoint formula.